What started as playful banter between Hollywood's favorite frenemies turned into television's most shocking meltdown when guest host Ryan Reynolds crossed every line imaginable with Hugh Jackman on live TV last night. The studio lights dimmed as the familiar Jimmy Kimmel live theme played. But something felt different from the moment Ryan Reynolds stepped onto the stage. Taking over hosting duties for the evening, Reynolds wore his signature smirk. But there was an edge to it that seasoned viewers hadn't seen before. The audience erupted in cheers, expecting the usual charm and wit that had made him one of Hollywood's most beloved actors. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to a very special edition of Jimmy Kimmel Live. I'm your host for tonight, Ryan Reynolds, and boy, do we have a treat for you, Reynolds announced, his voice carrying an unusual tension that the live audience seemed to miss entirely. The camera caught his eyes briefly, and something flickered there, a coldness that would soon become impossible to ignore. As the applause died down, Reynolds continued his monologue with what appeared to be his typical self-deprecating humor, but those paying close attention could detect barbs that cut deeper than usual. He made several jokes about failed projects, washed-up actors, and the desperation that drives celebrities to appear on talk shows. The audience laughed nervously, unsure whether this was brilliant comedy or something more sinister unfolding before their eyes. "Tonight's guest is someone very special to me," Reynolds said, his tone dripping with an ambiguity that made viewers lean forward in their seats. "We've known each other for years, worked together, and I think it's fair to say we've developed quite the relationship. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the one and only Hugh Jackman." The Australian actor bounded onto the stage with his characteristic warmth and energy, embracing Reynolds in what looked like a genuine hug. The audience roared their approval, expecting the playful rivalry that had entertained fans for over a decade. Jackman took his seat, flashing that million-dollar smile that had charmed audiences worldwide, completely unaware of the trap that had been carefully laid for him. "Hugh, great to see you, mate," Reynolds said, settling behind the desk with predatory ease. You look exactly like someone who's been desperately trying to stay relevant in Hollywood for the past few years." The comment landed like a slap. Jackman's smile faltered for just a moment before recovering, but the camera caught it all. The audience's laughter was more subdued now, confusion rippling through the crowd as they tried to process whether this was part of their famous feud or something genuinely hostile. "Always the charmer, Ryan," Jackman replied, maintaining his composure with practiced ease. "Though I have to say, guest hosting suits you. It's probably the closest you'll get to having your own show after that whole Green Lantern disaster killed your credibility." The counterattack was swift and sharp, but Reynolds didn't laugh it off as expected. Instead, his expression darkened, and the temperature in the studio seemed to drop several degrees. The band members exchanged worried glances, and the production crew began shifting uncomfortably behind their cameras. "Interesting you'd bring up career disasters, Hugh," Reynolds said, leaning forward with a predatory smile. "Speaking of which, how's the music career going? Still trying to convince people you're not just a washed-up Broadway has been playing dress-up in superhero movies?" The audience fell silent. This wasn't banter anymore. This was bloodsport. Jackman's jaw tightened, his famous composure beginning to crack under the unexpected assault. He'd come prepared for their usual playful exchanges, not this calculated character assassination being broadcast to millions. "I'm sorry, what exactly is your problem tonight, Ryan?" Jackman asked, his voice still controlled but with steel underneath. "Did Blake finally realize she married a middle-aged man having a permanent midlife crisis?" The personal attack hit its mark. Reynolds' mask slipped completely, revealing something ugly underneath. The studio audience gasped audibly as the friendly facade crumbled, replaced by genuine malice that made everyone present deeply uncomfortable. "At least I didn't spend 20 years pretending to be something I'm not," Reynolds snarled, all pretense of comedy abandoned. "Tell me, Hugh, when did you realize that without the claws and the muscles, You're just another aging pretty boy with nothing left to offer." The words hung in the air like poison. Jackman sat frozen, processing the viciousness of the attack. The cameras kept rolling, capturing every moment of the destruction of two careers unfolding in real time. Behind the scenes, producers were frantically trying to decide whether to cut to commercial, but the train wreck was too compelling to stop. What happened next would change everything, and viewers could sense they were witnessing something that would be talked about for years to come. Jackman slowly rose from his chair, his hands gripping the armrest so tightly his knuckles turned white. The studio lights caught the raw emotion flickering across his face as he struggled to maintain the dignity that had defined his decades-long career. The audience held its collective breath, sensing they were about to witness something unprecedented in live television history. "You know what, Ryan?" Jackman's voice was dangerously quiet, each word measured and deliberate. "I came here tonight, thinking we were friends, thinking this was just another chapter in our playful rivalry that fans love so much. But apparently you've confused entertainment with cruelty." Reynolds leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, wearing a satisfied smirk that made viewers' skin crawl. "Oh, here we go. The moral high ground routine. Tell me, Hugh, is this the part where you lecture me about professionalism? Because I seem to remember you being pretty comfortable throwing punches when it served your career." "What the hell are you talking about?" Jackman demanded, his famous composure finally beginning to fracture. The cameras zoomed in, capturing every micro-expression as decades of built-up resentment began spilling out onto the stage. "The Wolverine contract negotiations," Reynolds said, his voice dripping with venom. "You knew damn well I was up for that role first. You knew it, and you stabbed me in the back anyway. Then you had the audacity to play the supportive friend while you built an entire franchise on what should have been my character." The revelation hit the studio like a bombshell. Crew members froze in place, realizing they were witnessing the exposure of Hollywood's darkest secrets live on air. The audience murmured in shock, finally understanding that this wasn't scripted drama. This was years of genuine hatred finally exploding into the open. Jackman's face went pale, then flushed, red with anger. "Are you completely delusional? You were never even in the running for Wolverine. You're rewriting history to justify whatever psychotic breakdown you're having right now." "Liar!" Reynolds shot to his feet, pointing an accusatory finger across the desk. "You and your agent made sure I never even got a proper audition. You spread rumors about my commitment, my professionalism, anything to eliminate the competition. And then you smiled to my face at every party, every premiere, pretending we were buddies." The studio erupted in chaos. Audience members were pulling out phones, desperate to capture every second of the career-ending meltdown unfolding before them. Production assistants scrambled behind cameras, unsure whether to intervene or let the destruction continue for the sake of ratings gold. "This is absolutely insane," Jackman said, shaking his head in disbelief. "Even if that were true, which it isn't, that was 20 years ago, Ryan. You've built an entire career since then. You've made hundreds of millions of dollars. What kind of pathetic, bitter person holds on to imaginary grudges for 2 decades? The personal attack sent Reynolds over the edge completely. His face contorted with rage as he slammed his hand down on the desk, the impact echoing through the stunned studio. "Pathetic? You want to talk about pathetic? Let's talk about how you've spent the last 5 years desperately trying to recapture the glory of playing a character you never deserved in the first place." "You're sick," Jackman said quietly, but his words carried to every corner of the studio through his lapel microphone. "You need help, Ryan. This isn't normal behavior. This isn't professional. This is the kind of breakdown that ends careers." Reynolds laughed, but it was a harsh, bitter sound that made everyone in the studio uncomfortable. "My career? My career? Look around, Hugh. Look at what's happening here. You think anyone's going to remember your dignified response? They're going to remember that I exposed you for the fraud you really are." The confrontation had reached a fever pitch, with both men now standing on opposite sides of the desk, their voices raised to near-shouting levels. The studio audience sat in stunned silence, torn between horror and fascination, at witnessing the complete destruction of two Hollywood legends' friendship and reputations. Behind the scenes, network executives were frantically making phone calls, trying to decide whether to cut the feed or ride out the storm. Social media was already exploding with clips and commentary, turning what should have been a simple talk show appearance into the entertainment industry's biggest scandal in years. "You want to know what fraud looks like?" Jackman's voice cut through the chaos like a blade, his usual warmth replaced by ice-cold fury. "It looks like a man so consumed by jealousy and delusion that he's willing to destroy himself on live television just to drag someone else down with him." Reynolds circled around the desk, his movements predatory and unhinged. The security team tensed, ready to intervene, but unsure when to make their move. "Destroy myself? Hugh, I'm finally telling the truth. Something you wouldn't recognize if it bit you on your artificially enhanced ass." The crude language sent shockwaves through the studio audience, many of whom covered their mouths in horror. This was primetime television, and both men seemed to have completely forgotten they were broadcasting to millions of homes across the country. "The truth?" Jackman laughed bitterly, backing away as Reynolds approached. "The truth is that you're having a complete mental breakdown because your career peaked with a superhero movie where you spent half the time with your mouth sewn shut. You've been coasting on self-deprecating humor and your wife's success ever since." The personal attack on Blake Lively was the final straw. Reynolds' face twisted into something barely recognizable as human, his carefully constructed public persona crumbling entirely. "Don't you dare bring Blake into this. At least she married someone who doesn't have to pretend to be straight for the cameras." The studio fell dead silent. The implication hung in the air like a toxic cloud, and even Reynolds seemed to realize he'd crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. Jackman stood frozen, his face cycling through shock, hurt, and finally settling on pure rage. "How dare you?" Jackman whispered, his voice barely audible but carrying more menace than if he'd screamed. "How dare you drag my family, my personal life into your pathetic tantrum? You're not just attacking me anymore, Ryan. You're attacking people who have nothing to do with your imaginary grievances." The studio audience began to boo, their loyalty finally shifting entirely against Reynolds, as they witnessed the complete destruction of any semblance of decency or professionalism. Camera operators struggled to keep their shots steady as the emotional intensity in the room became almost unbearable. Reynolds seemed to realize the magnitude of what he'd done, but instead of backing down, he doubled down with desperate cruelty. "Hit a nerve, did I? The truth usually does. Tell me, Hugh, how long have you been living this lie? How long have you been pretending to be the perfect family man while—" "Enough!" Jackman's roar silenced every person in the studio. His face was flushed red with anger, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. For a moment, it looked like he might actually throw a punch, and security began moving closer to the stage. The band members had long since stopped playing, sitting in stunned silence as they watched two of Hollywood's biggest stars destroy each other and their careers in real time. The studio audience was a mix of horrified fascination and genuine concern, with some people actually getting up to leave, unable to stomach the brutality any longer. "You want to destroy me? Fine," Jackman said, his voice shaking with barely controlled rage. "But I won't let you drag innocent people down with your delusions. My wife, my children. They don't deserve to be casualties in whatever sick game you're playing." Reynolds laughed maniacally, completely unhinged now. "Casualties? Hugh, this isn't a game. This is justice. This is 20 years of pretending. 20 years of watching you get everything that should have been mine. 20 years of—" "Of what?" Jackman interrupted, stepping closer despite every instinct telling him to get away from the clearly unstable man in front of him. 20 years of you being unable to accept that maybe, just maybe, you weren't the right choice? That maybe someone else was better suited for the role? The words hit Reynolds like physical blows, and his face contorted with such raw pain and fury that even hardened crew members looked away. The cameras continued rolling, capturing every second of the most uncomfortable television moment in recent memory. Better suited? Reynolds' voice cracked with emotion. I devoted my entire life to that character. I studied, I trained, I lived and breathed Wolverine before you even knew the comics existed. And you just waltzed in with your pretty face and your Broadway connections and stole everything I'd worked for. The revelation of the depth of Reynolds' obsession sent chills through everyone present. This wasn't just professional jealousy anymore. This was something darker, more disturbing, the kind of fixation that destroyed lives and careers. Jackman stared at Reynolds with a mixture of pity and disgust, finally understanding the true nature of what he was dealing with. Ryan, you need help. This level of obsession, this hatred. It's not normal. It's not healthy. You're destroying yourself over something that happened 2 decades ago. Don't you dare psychoanalyze me, Reynolds screamed, spittle flying from his mouth as he completely lost control. You don't get to play the concerned friend now, not after everything you've taken from me. My career, my respect, my… Your what? Jackman's voice was calm now, almost clinical as he watched Reynolds unravel completely. Your delusions? Your fantasies about a life that was never yours to begin with? Ryan, I didn't take anything from you. I auditioned for a role, I got it, and I did my job. That's how this industry works. The studio audience watched in horrified fascination as Reynolds began pacing frantically, running his hands through his hair, muttering to himself like a man on the verge of a complete breakdown. Security personnel had positioned themselves strategically around the stage, ready to intervene at the first sign of physical violence. You don't understand, Reynolds whispered, his voice taking on an eerie, childlike quality that made everyone's skin crawl. Wolverine was supposed to be mine. It was destiny. I dreamed about it. I planned for it. I lived for it. And you just took it like it was nothing. It was nothing to you, Jackman said quietly, his earlier anger replaced by genuine concern for Reynolds' mental state. It was a job, Ryan, a role in a movie. But you've turned it into some kind of religious obsession that's consumed your entire life. The cameras continued rolling as Reynolds suddenly stopped pacing and turned to face Jackman with wild, unfocused eyes. 20 years, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. 20 years of watching you live my life, play my character, get my glory. Do you have any idea what that's like? To watch someone else living your dreams while you pretend to be happy. For them? The raw pain in Reynolds' voice was so genuine, so heartbreaking, that even the audience members who had been booing him moments earlier fell silent. This wasn't just a career meltdown anymore. This was a human being completely coming apart at the seams on live television. I'm sorry you feel that way, Jackman said, and for the first time all evening, his voice carried genuine compassion. I'm sorry you've carried this pain for so long, but Ryan, this isn't my fault. This is something you need to work through with professionals, not on a talk show in front of millions of people. Reynolds' laugh was hollow, broken. Professionals? You think therapy is going to fix 20 years of stolen dreams? You think talking about it is going to give me back everything you took from me? I didn't take anything from you, Jackman finally snapped, his patience exhausted. You never had it to begin with. You created this entire fantasy in your head, and then blamed me when reality didn't match your delusions. The harsh truth hit Reynolds like a physical blow. He staggered backward, his face cycling through denial, rage, and finally settling on something that looked almost like recognition. For a moment, everyone in the studio held their breath, wondering if he might finally come to his senses. Instead, Reynolds did something that shocked everyone present. He began to laugh. Not the maniacal cackle from earlier, but a low, bitter chuckle that grew in intensity until it filled the entire studio. The sound was so unsettling that several audience members actually got up and left, unable to stomach watching the complete psychological collapse of a man they had once admired. "You're right," Reynolds said finally, his voice eerily calm. "You're absolutely right, Hugh. I never had it. I never had any of it. The role, the respect, the career I thought I deserved. It was all just a fantasy, wasn't it?" Jackman watched warily as Reynolds walked back to the host's desk, suddenly looking older and more fragile than anyone had ever seen him. "Ryan, please. Let's get you some help. Let's end this before it gets any worse." "Worse?" Reynolds picked up his coffee mug from the desk and stared at it as if seeing it for the first time. "Hugh, this is the best I've felt in 20 years. Do you know why? Because I finally told the truth. I finally stopped pretending that we were friends, that I was okay with how things turned out, that I didn't hate you with every fiber of my being." The admission hung in the air like a death sentence for both their careers. Reynolds set down the mug and looked directly into the camera, addressing the millions of viewers who were witnessing his complete professional suicide. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said with mock formality, "I want you all to know that Hugh Jackman is everything you think he is. He's talented, professional, and genuinely a good person. And I'm exactly what you're seeing right now. A bitter, jealous, pathetic man who spent 20 years hating someone for being better than me." With that devastating self-assessment, Reynolds walked away from the desk, past the stunned security guards, and straight toward the exit. Jackman called after him, "Ryan, wait!" But Reynolds didn't turn around. "Goodbye, Hugh," Reynolds said, without looking back. "Enjoy the rest of your perfect life." The studio doors slammed shut behind him with a finality that echoed through the stunned silence. Jackman stood alone on the stage, looking shell-shocked and heartbroken as the cameras continued to roll. The audience sat in complete silence, processing what they had just witnessed. Not just the end of a friendship, but the complete destruction of a man's career and reputation in real time. The incident would dominate headlines for weeks, effectively, ending Reynolds' career while paradoxically increasing sympathy for Jackman, who handled the situation with more grace than anyone could have expected. It became a cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked obsession and the importance of mental health in an industry that often prioritizes performance over personal well-being.